People, I am so sick right now. It's not a joke. But here I am, June 2023, English B. Let's get it done. Alright, first, pause and read this passage. Alright, you can pause along the way and attempt the questions yourself. I'm just going to be blitzing through. I'm not spending much time on this paper. I am out of juice. Number one, what does the audience learn from the lines? Learn from lines 2 to 9 of the extract. Let's see, from lines 2 to 9. That should be from here. Well, we learned that Granny's house was burnt down while she was out. It's very clear from the dialogue. If you look up here, it's very clear. It's Granny's house that burnt down. The old lady lost everything. And then down here, she was out when the fire started. So Granny's house was burnt down while she was out. Number 2, jurors suspected that foul play was involved, meaning this wasn't an accident. Somebody burnt the house down in the incident because Granny, answer C, was aware of the danger in using mosquito coils, so she never used them. So the theory as to how the house burnt down was that a mosquito coil fell on the bed. That's what they said. Jury says a mosquito coil. I doubt Granny would use a coil. She's always saying that it's all those modern chemicals that are getting people sick. It would be most strange if she was using mosquito coils. And that's where Gordon says, so what started the fire then? You suspect foul play? So since Granny would not have used a mosquito coil, then if that's the theory that a mosquito coil burnt the house down, then something is wrong, because that's not likely true. Alright, number 3. The dramatic function of the letter is that it heightens the suspense of the situation. Let's look at the letter. Down here, we see that Granny takes an envelope out and gives it to Mrs. D, who reads it. And this letter is basically a threat. Somebody threatened Granny, threatened that, we're going to burn your house down if you don't sell the land. And what this does is it creates suspense, because now we're saying, okay, there's a development. There was some threat. Who threatened? We're not sure. And most of the suspense comes from trying to piece together who would have written this letter, because that would likely be the person who would have burned the house down. Number 4, Granny's reaction to the threatening letter in lines 24 to 26. Let's check the reaction. It's 24, 25, 26. Gives the audience the impression that she is trusting and naive. Look at what she says. I thought it was just a joke somebody was trying to play on me. You know how young people like to frighten old people. So she's being naive in not taking the very serious letter very seriously. How could I ever think that somebody was planning to burn my house down? So she's trusting that no one would actually do that. That is something that nobody would do. Like, people aren't that evil. Who could be that cruel? So trusting and naive. D is kind of close with the optimistic. You can say that she's optimistic about people's intentions. She's confident that no one would burn the house down, but these are kind of stretching it. They're not as accurate. Trusting, naive, that's pretty spot on. Alright, number 5. Although Mrs. Swingley is off stage, her character is significant because it does 2 and 3. Let's take a look at where her character appears. So they're trying to figure out who possible suspects could be. I think hard Granny, there must have been at least one time when somebody was unkind to you. Try and remember. Well, there was one time when I slipped and fell on the church step, and as I was sitting there on the ground trying to get up, along came Mrs. Swingley, and I smiled at her, thinking that she was coming to help me up. But instead, she just looked at me with a strange kind of smile on her face and walked off in the other direction. So we have this incident where Mrs. Swingley was unkind to Granny. It doesn't really give us a motive, though, because we don't know why she was unkind to Granny. We don't know why. If it is that the crime, if it is that the house being burnt down is connected to Mrs. Swingley, we're not getting an idea of why she would have done it from this here. So 1 would be out. Look at 2 here. Develops characterization and insight into other characters. Of course, we see more of how Granny is trusting and naive, in that she assumes that this person coming up to her is about to help her up. So that develops the characterization of Granny. But also we see what Mrs. Swingley is like, right? She's the kind of person who would not help an old lady up. Yeah, and that provides insight into both characters. So 2 is fine. And 3, provides intrigue and highlights the theme. The intrigue is that, why wouldn't she have helped Granny up? What is it that she has against Granny? What is Mrs. Swingley thinking? What is her motive? That's some intrigue. And it does add to a couple of themes, exploitation of the vulnerable, social injustice, lack of empathy and compassion, power dynamics, stuff like that. So a lot of different themes do come up when we see this woman who is, kind of in control, in power in this scenario, not helping Granny. All right, number 6. Granny and Jerry's opinion of Mr. Swingley expressed in lines 42 to 43. Let's see. It's ironic because, it suggests that Mr. Swingley appears to be a good person, but he's really devious. So Gordon says, Swingley, that name sounds familiar, after Granny talks about Mrs. Swingley. Her husband owns the big store at the corner of Hill Street. I know him. Seems like an alright kind of fella to me. He's a very nice man. One day, he gave me a lift to King's Village. So, the irony is, even though he's being characterized as a good guy, we know from the rest of the passage that he's a terrible guy and he's trying to take advantage of the people around him. He's trying to have his own way and get what he wants at the expense of others. So the irony is in that contrast of, they think he's a good guy, but we can see that he's not a good guy. In particular, this is more dramatic irony, the audience having information that the other characters don't have. Number 7, the exchange between Mrs. Haynes and Mr. Swingley in line 60 to 71, let's highlight that, is significant mainly because it signals a twist in the plot of the extract. So here in Mr. Swingley's office, we have the person in charge of the radio station. Mr. Swingley is asking the manager of the radio to play down the news of the fire. Don't cover this news so much. Don't talk about it. Obviously, Mr. Swingley is behind the fire, and he doesn't want much attention being brought to that. And then down here, he's saying, good, now listen to me carefully. I had nothing to do with that fire, blah, blah, blah. But I can't say I'm sorry it happened. And he goes on to say he would want that spot to, open a supermarket there. And Mr. Swingley is saying, basically, advertise for me and I'll make sure you get some money in return. Talk about this new program called Community Movement, which will make people want to have supermarkets in the villages. And that would, of course, help Mr. Swingley. And in return, he's offering the radio manager some shares in the new supermarket. And look at what he wants. He wants Jerry D off the radio, right? Jerry D is the same Jerry up here. So he wants to play down the news of the fire and he wants Jerry off the radio. Clearly, he wants to, use his power and authority, manipulate Mrs. Haynes, and basically get away with burning the house down while getting the chance to open up his new supermarket. And the twist it signals is that Mr. Swingley will likely not be held accountable for what he has done, because he will basically get Mrs. Haynes in his back pocket. He will be able to circumvent the law, play down the news of the fire, and have his way. That is the twist that we're expecting. Further up, it sounded as if Mrs. Haynes was not willing to help him out. I'm the manager. You may have a lot of money and blah, 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 but you don't own the radio station. But we see down here, she becomes a little bit more compliant, asking, how do we do that without getting attention, blah, blah, blah. He offers her money, and we get the impression that she's going to crack eventually. So the hope that we had up here when she was holding her own, we lose that hope down here. And no, we're not expecting things to turn for the better, when it comes to Jerry and Granny. The other answers don't make sense. It's a tough question, so I'll eliminate A, C, and D. It doesn't lead to the main crisis because the main crisis happened before, which was Granny's house burning down. And we already know the true nature of Mr. Swingley, so it doesn't reveal his true nature. And I guess we're learning a bit more of Mrs. Haynes. We saw some integrity earlier, but that integrity is kind of being chipped at. So C wouldn't be it. And it definitely doesn't resolve anything at all. Number 8, which of the following statements best demonstrates how the playwright arouses the audience's interest in the action? That would be D. Simple. Announce a new program called Community Movement, which will make people want to have new supermarkets in their villages? This is not a great question, but we can eliminate A, B, and C. They don't arouse any interest in any action. Granny thinking it was a joke. Simply just saying who this person is and just saying, I've already played down the news. These just could not be it. So it has to be D. It's not a great response, but it's all we have. And I guess the interest being aroused is we see the plan that Mr. Swingley has to basically get away with what he's done and to use the radio station to his advantage. So yeah, a bit of a weird question, but that's my answer. 9. Which of the following is one of the major themes of the extract? That would have to be B. Power can be used to oppress others. We say Mr. Swingley has the power of wealth, and I guess he has a big name because of that. He's able to manipulate others. We see manipulating Mrs. Haynes to have his way, and clearly he was involved in the destruction of Granny's house. 10. The tone of the extract can best be described as ironic, and this person who will be coming to contribute to the community, build a supermarket and so on. You would see such a person as being an asset to the community, but we see that this person is actually destroying the community from the inside and just manipulating people to have his own way. And then we see that Mrs. Haynes, who should be a journalistic pillar in the community, is now being manipulated or is about to be manipulated. The passage isn't quite conclusive by this mastermind. So these can be considered ironic. It's not an amazing question, but the other options just don't work at all. Alright, here's the next passage. You can read this on your own, read it through carefully. Alright, here we go. Lines 2 to 7. Let's highlight those lines. Are significant because they A. indicate the tension and likely theme. Let's look more closely. I'm going to get married, Helen says, but the news is received in silence. We already have some tension here. If someone makes such an exciting declaration, I'm going to get married, and the person on the other end is silent, clearly there's some tension or shock, right? I said I'm going to get married. Yes, I heard the first time. What do you want me to do? Laugh and throw pennies? Is it that Peter Smith? So clearly a very tense conversation happening here. He's the unlucky man. A little bit of sarcasm. You're centuries older than him. So we see this. We see some conflict or some tension between these two immediately, and we can imagine themes of marriage, relationships, stuff like that. We're not sure what the precise theme is going to be, but it's going to be something to do with marriage or relationship, maybe something to do with marriage and age, because we have centuries older than him. So yeah, A is the only option we have. B wouldn't work, especially because there's not any anger here. There is some anxiety. There's not really disagreement, to be precise, but actually there might not even be any anxiety here. It's merely tension we're seeing. And these lines don't explain anything at all. And D is not done. We don't get the impression that we shouldn't be listening to any of these characters. Alright, 12. Peter's entrance in line 10 primarily serves to A. Create a diversion from an awkward situation. So Peter appears here. And remember, this is drama. It's a play, right? So by saying create a diversion, this would be the playwright's intent to divert from that particular situation. And the awkward situation would be, sorry, I am choking up. The awkward situation would be this awkward conversation of the news of getting married not being received well. And you're centuries older than him, only 10 years. You don't look 40. You're a sort of well-preserved 60. No, not a fun conversation to be having. Very awkward. And then later on, when you find out they're mother and daughter, it becomes even more tasteless. And then we have music. Enter Peter carrying a large bouquet and a box of chocolates and looking uncomfortable. So this kind of diverts from that. That's kind of a dramatic effect of his entrance. B doesn't work. There's no animosity between the two families. We don't even know what two families this is talking about. And Peter wasn't summoned here, and I don't think Peter is creating any kind of diversity and contrast. No, that's a stretch. Okay, 13. The stage directions. She throws the lid at him. Line 23, and Helen is heard singing off stage, line 43, are effective primarily because they. So let's highlight these. The answer is B. Appeal to the senses and present contrasting emotional responses. So if you look at these two, here we have Peter talking to Joe. Remember, Joe is Helen's daughter, and she doesn't speak to her mother with any sort of respect at all. They sound more like friends than anything else, and not the kind of friends who have much respect for each other. And Joel, we know, is very critical of the decision that Helen is making to marry Peter. She's also critical and judgmental of Peter. At least she's trying to kind of figure him out, assess him, and perhaps decide whether or not he's a good fit for her mother. So they sit here. So in this scene here, Peter says, "Don't sit there guzzling all those chocolates at once." And then she throws the lid at him, maybe the lid of the chocolate tin or whatever, the lid of the chocolate can or something. And Peter says, "What the hell are you playing at? Sit down and behave yourself." Quite a stern thing to say to your future stepdaughter. And then she says, "Hey, don't start bossing me around. You're not my father." And she attacks him, half crying, half laughing. So this thing with her throwing the lid at him, it's kind of an intense moment. It's not extremely playful and innocent. And then down here we have Helen singing. She's singing, having a good time. So between those two stage directions, those two actions, we do see contrasting emotional responses between the singing and the throwing of the lid. And we can say there's an appeal to the senses, right? We can say that there's the sense of hearing with the song, and then there's the sense of movement or sense of touch with the throwing of the lid at Peter. So yeah, B. And the other options just aren't strong contenders. 14. Which of the following best describe the mother-daughter relationship? I would say bitter and disrespectful. They're not really talking to each other with much respect. The daughter especially is very harsh, very disrespectful towards the mother. To be honest, it's shocking. I can't imagine my sister talking to my mother that way. I don't know. This is strange. Yeah. Even from the first lines, you don't look 40. You look a sort of well-preserved 60. Wow. And there's also some bitterness with the daughter not being happy for her mother. Not being happy with the marriage arrangement. So that's some bitterness. And the dialogue just gives us that kind of bitter and disrespectful vibe between the two. You could see it as just vulgar and playful, but it does cross over to disrespect and bitterness. A is actually a very strong contender for the answer, loud and vulgar. That might be just a matter of how much grace you give these characters. If you give them a little bit more grace, then A looks better. I don't give them as much grace. I see some disrespect in the interaction, especially from Joe to Helen. And then look at how Joe greets Helen's future husband. He comes in, "Hello, daddy," obviously very sarcastically. So even if you want to say they're just having banter between themselves, she's dragging Peter into this kind of attitude. Also, you told her, of course, come and sit down. And then look at this question: how did she talk you into it? You must be out of your mind. You could say she's joking, but at some point I have to draw the line and say, okay, this isn't just being funny, being jovial. This sounds bitter at some point. So yeah, I think C is a little bit better than A. 15. Which of the following does the playwright achieve most effectively in lines 29 to 36? Let's highlight those lines. From here down to here, Joe basically interrogating Peter. Joe's insistence and urgency in unraveling Peter's past and finding the truth are revealed. Why do you wear that black patch? I lost an eye. Where? During the war. Were you in the Navy, Army, officer, private? So clearly Joe is trying to dig into Peter's background quickly and figure out who he is. 16. The best explanation of the significance of the hat as a prop. Lines 44 and 52. Is that it? Let's look at those lines. 44 and 52. So up in 44, Joe wears my hat. Down in 52, thanks, do you like my hat, Peter? Yeah, C makes the most sense. Provides a striking contrast between the actions and attitudes of Peter and Helen. Let's look back up here. So up here, Helen is looking for the hat. Down here, she puts it on and she's asking Peter if he likes it. And we kind of have to look outside of these lines to find that contrast, because these lines don't really tell the full story. Helen is looking for the hat. Down here, she finds it, asks Peter if he likes it. Peter says, "Bang on, darling," and he takes the hat. Oh, maybe this is the line, taking the hat. It's line 52, right? This is 55, 54, 53. So is it here? Well, it doesn't matter whether it's here or here. It's this area. And he takes the hat and asks, "How do I look?" He's joking around. Helen kind of gets upset. "Peter, give it here. Stop fooling about. It took me ages to get this hat on right. Give it to me. It's my best one. Put it down." And Peter says to himself, "No sense of humor." So we see that striking contrast. Peter has a sense of humor. He's a bit playful. He doesn't take something like a hat super seriously. He doesn't take fashion too seriously. He's just poking fun, having fun in the moment. But Helen, was taking it very seriously. She didn't show that she had a sense of humor, at least not in that moment. So that's a contrast between the attitudes and, of course, the action. Helen putting on the hat seriously, asking how it looks, while Peter just grabbing it and putting it on carelessly on his own head. B is a little close, but I don't think we could strongly say that it appears that he doesn't like Joe. He's just responding to Joe. Just responding to how Joe is speaking to him. And A and D just don't make sense. Alright, let's get to 17. The statement that Helen makes in line 58 is got a wallet full of reasons suggest to the audience that she is selfish and materialistic. So her main reason for marrying this guy is he has money. Yeah, as simple as that. 18. Which of the following best describe Peter's attitude to where Helen lives? Dismissive and arrogant. We see that, especially down at the end. Those bloody little street kids have probably pulled the car to pieces by now, but we needn't worry about that, need we? I just want to get the hell out of this black hole of Kolkata. So clearly there's a sense of dismissiveness and arrogance. He's better than this ghetto place. The street kids are gonna just tear up my car. I need to get out of this hellhole. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. Definitely no respect. He's not charmed. Conceited and egotistical. These are kind of too similar to give a range of proper adjectives. And I don't know if there's much of an ego here. Egotistical is kind of too extreme a way to describe the attitude, even if you might say there's some amount of conceitedness. And unforgiving, that doesn't make sense. 19. Which of the following could be an appropriate title for the extract? I just never like this question, but I will say trouble ahead. It doesn't seem as if this marriage is gonna last. Doesn't seem as if the marriage is gonna work. Welcome home doesn't make sense. Heaven on earth doesn't make sense. The gold diggers almost makes sense, but then plural. I think there's only one gold digger here. Joe isn't showing to be a gold digger. 20. Based on the details of the extract, what is the most likely outcome of the events portrayed? Helen and Peter will live together and Joe will start her job and become financially independent. We know Helen and Peter are going to be getting married, so they're going to live together. And Joe is saying, "Have you got a key, Helen? I might not be here when you decide to come back. I'm starting work on Saturday." Yep, that's that. Alright, you can pause here and read this poem. Remember, pause as you go and attempt the questions on your own before you listen to my suggested answers and explanations. According to lines 1 to 7, the images of the country created in the mind of the speaker are... Answer C, simplistic and stereotypical. At 10, I knew nothing about life in the country. The name everyone gave all places outside the span of the town. So already we have some of the stereotypical coming out. The country is just this place that is not town. It's not any specific place. There's no specific association. It's just, all of those rural places. We call it the country. But the mind brushed through its pictures of streams and waterfalls, bamboo canopies, and pastures with grazing cows. And so we continue with all of these images that are kind of stereotypical. This is what we imagine that the typical countryside area looks like. A very simplistic and stereotypical image. 22. Which of the following best describe the speaker? Inquisitive and observant. Inquisitive in that he's, wondering about what country life is about. The speaker wants to kind of live this country life for a little while, see what it's about, and then he gets his chance when Lennox says he can spend some time on his grandmother's coffee estate. So that's the inquisitive part. And the observant part can be seen in the poem's imagery. We see that he would have been paying attention to the environment, noticing different elements of nature. Maybe the most compelling evidence is here. I saw the motley colored leaves mixed on the trail like a palette, happily absorbing pure country wholesomeness. So we can see, not just here, but before and after, you see him really paying attention, observing the environs. Naive kind of makes sense, but trustworthy doesn't work here. Hesitant? I don't think he was hesitant, and I don't think he was lonely, and we don't really see much evidence of kindness. Number 23. Which of the following devices is used in line 20? Through the trees, streaks of light dapple the ground. That's clearly some wonderful imagery. 24. The image portrayed in clicking my eyelids like shutters. Line 25. Down here. Clicking my eyelids like shutters, snapping pods with red, cream, white, and mustard wavy hunks. Well, this clicking my eyes like shutters, this captures the movement and sound of opening and closing, as shutters, whether on the windows or even shutters related to camera and lenses, as they open and close. The eyelids open and close just like that, and we get the motion and the sound, right? We get the motion and the sound. The clicking gives you that sound as well. 25. Which of the following figurative devices are used in a tree thwacked my forehead and knocked me back? Line 29. That's onomatopoeia in the thwacked, kind of that sound that represents the meaning, and the personification with the tree thwacking the head as if the tree had that ability to on its own volition just hit the speaker. It's really the speaker that would have kind of ran into the tree. The tree didn't just get up and punch the speaker. So there's some personification as well. 26. Which of the following devices are mainly used by the poet to convey his message? And that would be B. Couplets, because we see that the lines are in pairs here. Throughout the poem, we have pair lines, appear, 1 2 1 2 1 2. Call those couplets, and there's lots of alliteration throughout. If we even look at just the first couple of lines, I knew nothing, small span of the tone, seen in my school reader, scattered shadows, and then the scenery, shutters snapping, similes. We do see end rhymes, but we don't see any emphasis on similes. Not very much contrast here, and we don't see rhyming. I guess by rhyming pairs they mean rhyming couplets, which we're not seeing all the way through. For example, coffee doesn't rhyme with ground, even though we see day and way, so that's not consistent. And quatrains are there. 27. Which of the following best describes the speaker's tone? And conversational. This is just someone, kind of having a conversation with us. Very, very clear. The others don't make any sense. So, 28. The best example of irony in the poem would be the title, because the poem recounts a painful experience, not a pleasure. Pleasure is the opposite of pain. 29. In which of the following lines does a change in mood occur? That would be D. With a tight, anxious hold on the rope. That's where we reach some amount of anxiety, even panic. At first, it was all sunshine and rainbows. He was imagining what the beauty of the countryside, and then we rode in brushing bush, and then he described the short but sweet experience he had of country pleasures. Basically, the short but sweet experience he had of the countryside, but it ended too fast, and then he got a chance to spend some time with Lennox. Spend some time at Lennox's grandmother's coffee farm. That's where he would experience country pleasures, or so he thought. And then we get some nice imagery. The chance had come. There's some anticipation, excitement. But then there's a change when he's, anxiously holding on to the rope, is it a donkey? Yeah, when the donkey starts to move pretty fast over the land, he starts to get anxious. So that's the change in mood. 30. Based on the last 3 stanzas of the poem, which of the following statements best expresses one lesson the speaker learns. That's D. Despite the setting, life's experience will contain joys and sorrows. So yes, there might be country pleasures to enjoy, but there will be some pain to go along with that. There will be some sorrows as well. And it's despite the setting, because the speaker would have expected, just pleasure. But then he's saying, he's realizing that it's not just pleasure. There will be sorrows to experience as well. That's it for that poem. This is a hard poem, a pretty hard poem. So here we have a boy kind of reminiscing, reflecting on the yard boy that used to work in his yard. The yard boy isn't really a boy. It's a little bit of a demeaning name, but it's the man who, would be doing manual labor, like for his family and stuff. 31. In creating the word boy world, line 1, the poet portrays an image that suggests distance between the boy and the person he admired. There is some distance or some difference, some distinction, some contrast between the two. We know that the person being admired, even though he's a yard boy, it's actually a very manly person, very strong, doing the woodwork, working hard. Whereas the speaker at this point is living in a boy world. He's, just a boy. He's far removed from what the yard boy would have been experiencing. And it becomes a little clearer here, even though this line itself is kind of hard. The skinny weakly named before on the covers of those comic books he couldn't read. So more differences, he couldn't read, the speaker could read. He was named before. The speaker was named before. Those before and after pictures. These magazines would be magazines depicting persons who would have gotten fitter, bigger, stronger. So before, they would be skinny and scrawny like the speaker was. After would be more like the yard boy. So the boy world would be the kind of bubble the speaker would have been living in. That kind of boyhood, childhood, innocence, inside kind of life. So that's his boy world. There's some distance between the speaker and the yard boy. 32. In which of the following examples is the poet's use of contrast most evident? That's A, 1 and 2 only. The worker is illiterate and the speaker is not, because the speaker could have read the comic books. The speaker is skinny and the worker is muscled. Work days and weekdays, no contrast there, because work days were weekdays. The difference would have been between weekdays and Sundays, because on Sundays the yard boy would have rested. So there's no contrast between the work days and the weekdays. 33. The effect of the image in lines 7 to 9. Let's highlight that. 7, 8, 9 is that it conveys the idea of steady rhythmic movement. I told the days by the stroke of the axe, morning by morning. So we see time elapsing in that steady, day after day, in that steady stream of day after day. But then the axe would be steady in its movement. This man would have been wielding the axe rhythmically, skillfully, and the movement of the axe would have been so precise and so skillful and so well timed that the speaker could tell time by it in that sense. So in one sense, a lot of time would have been passed while the yard boy would have been working, not just in one day, but the speaker, remember, the yard boy working for years. And then there's the other sense in which the yard boy's movement with the axe, the wielding of the axe was so accurate and timely that time could have been told by it. 34. The figurative device used in the haft seasoned by the sweat of his palms. This is a metaphor because the haft or the handle of the axe isn't literally seasoned by the palms the way we season chicken to cook and eat it. It's just that, the sweat would have been soaked into the axe's handle as the yard boy would be working over a long period of time. 35. Which of the following effects is created in the image blade flashing, splitting wood? Lines 12, 13. That's A. The glint of the axe is sharpness and the wood falling into pieces upon impact. The blade flashing, that's the glint of the axe, and also its sharpness. The splitting wood, that would be the wood falling into pieces upon impact. B is a little close, but it's not really the speed of the axe that we're working with, but the flashing, the blade flashing, right? And lightning speed would be a bit of a reach. 36, line 15. Line 15 it says, and polish these words is primarily effective because it B highlights the change from past to present. So the speaker is reflecting in this stanza using past tense, and now bam, we're now in present tense, which indicates that it's no longer reflection, it's about what's happening now in the speaker's mind. 37. The poem references to polished in line 14 and polished in line 15 are significant because they highlight the contrasting tasks of the speaker and the yard boy. So the yard boy had to polish the shoes, so the yard boy's polishing was a manual job, whereas the speaker is polishing words. So the speaker's job is more of a linguistic and academic kind of job. In this case, more of a reflective, thought-driven job. So the speaker, and that harkens back to the first stanza, where the speaker would be reading comic books that the yard boy would look like the fit muscular guy on the comic book cover, but the speaker wouldn't be able to read the books. The speaker is polishing words, the yard boy is polishing shoes. The same word is used, but it's used to indicate two very different types of tasks. 38. Stanzas 1 and 2 are connected primarily through the extended ideas relating to hands and the sharpened axe. We see the sharpened axe here. We see sweat of the palms here. We see hands down here. These words are hands laid. And then we have reference again to the axe, shoulders that hefted so much. 39, in lines 18 to 19, the speaker can best be described as critical and regretful. The speaker is self-critical, critical of himself, and regretful that he did not express his appreciation of the yard boy earlier. Perhaps when the yard boy could have, received that appreciation. It says, and yet wherever he may be, remembering or not. So he's not sure if the yard boy is even alive, or if, his words will ever reach the yard boy. No. So there's that kind of regret, because clearly the speaker admires and, has some kind of love and respect for the yard boy. So imagine giving this tribute only, this late. There would be some regret and criticalness. There would be some regret and self-judgment. And the other options don't work at all. There's no hopefulness. There's reflective, but no hopeful. There is nostalgic. I wouldn't say there's worry per se. And these aren't there. Last one. Which of the following lines best expresses the main idea of the poem? Is a tribute. This poem is a tribute. Alright, we've moved on to the next passage. The spoiler. You can pause and read here and even attempt the first couple of questions. Okay, 41. The first person narration is particularly effective in the extract because it helps readers experience the child's growing frustration and his desire for revenge. We're thrown into the speaker's shoes, we can see from their perspective, and so their emotions kind of become our emotions as the reader. The other options just can't work at all. Okay, moving fast. 42. The statement, I'll always remember him as a spoiler. Let me try to tell you what he spoiled. Let's find those lines. Okay, that's just line 1, right? What do these lines suggest? They suggest B. The child narrator is self-aware, articulate, and directly engages the audience. The child is aware of their own perspective, right? They're articulate. The child is clearly speaking their mind. It's very easy to understand what the child is saying, and there's a direct engagement of the audience. Let me try to tell you what is spoiled. That's a very direct way to converse with the reader, right? 43. Which of the following statements best describes the meaning of a halo of gloom slipped out of the taxi with him and accompanied him up our front step and into our living room and hung over his head as he collapsed on the sofa? Let's find those lines. 7 to 9. That's going to be B. Gloom is personified with kinesthetic imagery and visual attributes as it hovers over the visitor and goes with him everywhere. So let's break this down a little bit. Gloom is personified. How? Because the gloom slipped out of the taxi with him and accompanied him as if it's a person making the decision to do that. The kinesthetic imagery is the movement of the gloom. The slipping out of the taxi and accompanying him. Kinesthetic imagery is imagery of movement. And then you have the visual attribute of it being a halo, surrounding him over his head and it hanging over his head. And we know that it goes with him everywhere because it followed him out of the taxi, followed him as he walked into the living room, and as he sat on the sofa, it followed him there as well. So yeah, B makes sense. Every part of B makes sense. 44. During the lunchtime dialogue between the narrator's mother and her guest, the impression created of Marcus Aurelius is that he is A, superstitious and wearied by the challenges of his life, right? He's definitely wearied. He seems tired, exhausted, overwhelmed by the challenges, and he's superstitious. He believes in this Baku thing. He takes it quite seriously. 45. The imagery in the midnight sky, blah, 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 lines 48 to 50. Let's find those lines. This imagery is effective because it, D, reinforces Boy's growing tension, paralleling his state of mind to drunkenness when he expresses himself as a frustrated avenger. So we know that Boy is frustrated and seeking revenge because this person has, taken up all his time, has forced him to stay in and, deal with him. He didn't get the chance to go out to the beach and play and stuff like that. So we see the growing tension, and we also see this comparison to drunkenness as Boy drank the moonlight, not literally, of course. I sucked in the perfume of the lady of the night. I was lightheaded. More references to drunkenness. And we know that this has everything to do with vengeance, because right after this, we see why Boy is out here standing in the moonlight. He howls and he basically frightens this stupid, superstitious man into believing that, the Baku is attacking him or whatever. So yeah, D makes sense. 46. The narrator's character could best be described as tolerant and mischievous. Tolerant because even though he was really annoyed, frustrated with Marcus's presence and with the fact that he had to, stay and babysit this man, he did tolerate Marcus. He did, do his job. He didn't just run away and leave. He followed his mother's instructions and so on. But the mischief is obvious because he, pretends to be a Baku in the end. He frightens Marcus and gets his revenge. The others don't make sense. He's neither submissive nor devout. I don't know about reactive, but we could say he's somewhat observant. Maybe he's a little bit reactive, kind of reacting to, being in this situation of having to, miss out on playing. So he reacts by becoming the Baku. So, I would give reactive maybe a half point. And observant, I guess, I don't know if he would have had to be observant to understand anything about Marcus, because Marcus said everything. So he just had to, listen and understand where Marcus was coming from and what his fears were. So there's not much observantness there. And not seeing anything about being compassionate. Could say skeptical because that could be seen as an antonym for superstitious. Okay. 47. The narrator comments on the visitor's arrival, his conversations, and his response to the events to suggest that Marcus, and that is a C for me, 2 and 3 only, his chaotic home life has brought on anxiety and depression. We saw that earlier on with, the gloom following him out of the taxi and so on. And he talks about how, back at home, he was cursed with given this bottle and blah, blah, blah. So that makes sense. And then, so 2 makes sense. And 3, spiritual turmoil makes him appear helpless and superstitious. The spiritual turmoil, he thinks he's being haunted by the Baku and stuff like that. So he does exude this sense of helplessness, and clearly he's superstitious. So that makes sense. And 1 doesn't really make sense. His attitude conceals social and cultural traditions. I would say his attitude reveals social and cultural traditions. It isn't concealing anything. So 1 doesn't make sense. So C. 48. Which of the following literary devices is used in line 1? I slithered away from the bush. Let's find that. Not line 1, line 61. I slithered away from the bush. Now, this one is a bit tricky because slither can be considered onomatopoeic, but it's more clearly a metaphor because a human being slithering, clearly there's a comparison to a snake, right? So I slithered away from the bush. Boy is comparing himself to a snake, being as sneaky and as stealthy and as deceptive as a snake. That is the most important thing here. 49. The conflict experienced by boy is, that would be D, external conflict, because boy isn't in conflict with himself, he's in conflict with Marcus and the problem that he has caused upon him, boy. And this conflict is introduced through narration and action. We see what is said and what is done, and that is what makes the conflict clear. So it's a very obvious answer. We can eliminate B and C because the conflict is more external than internal, and then the conflict isn't really introduced through symbols, so we can eliminate A. 50. The major theme of the excerpt is the differences in belief that trigger a need for revenge. Marcus believes in this Baku business. Boy clearly isn't buying that. He's just very annoyed that it's becoming his problem. And these differences in beliefs, creates this situation in which Boy needs to exact revenge by becoming the Baku and frightening Marcus. Alright, we're going fast down to the end here. Final passage, everyday use. So you can pause here, read this, and attempt the first couple of questions. Alright, let's move fast. This video is already too long. My voice won't make it past another 5 minutes. What narrative point of view is used in the extract? First person. We see I, we, stuff like that. So that's clear. 52. The depiction of Maggie's walk as a lame animal, blah, blah, blah. Let's find the lines. 10 and 11 can best be described as, that's going to be C, a true and sad observation regarding Maggie's self-esteem. Have you ever seen a lame animal, perhaps a dog, run over by some careless person rich enough to own a car, sidle up to someone who is ignorant enough to be kind to him? So we know, we see the comparison here. Maggie is being, compared to this lowly, shameful animal that has to be pitied, right? In the way she walks and perhaps in the way she sees herself. 53. Who is the narrator of the extract? That's the mother. The mother is the one, the mother is the I in the extract. And that's obvious in many parts, but just an example of where that's obvious. How do I look, mama? Maggie says, come out into the yard, I say. So someone is talking to mama and the I replies. So the I must be mama. 54. According to the narrator, how does D react when the first house burnt to the ground? That's D, almost joyful. Take a look down here. Sometimes I could still hear the flames and feel Maggie's arms sticking to me, her hair smoking and her dress falling off her in little black papery flakes. And D, I see her standing off under the sweet gum tree she used to dig gum out of, a look of concentration on her face as she watched the last dingy grey boards of the house falling towards the red hot brick chimney. Why don't you do a dance around the ashes? I wanted to ask her. She hated the house that much. So if you're going to ask someone who's watching a house burn to the ground, why don't you do a dance? Then, obviously, you are so happy, you're so smug. You hate this house so much that you must be so glad it's being burned down. You might as well just dance and celebrate, right? So she watched almost with joy. 55. The narrator reveals Maggie's feeling about her sister, primarily through analysis provided by the mother's description. We see how Maggie feels about the sister through how the mother describes the situation. I'm just blitzing through the rest here. I'm at the end of my paw. If you have any questions about these questions, let me know in the comments, but I'm just blitzing through for right now. 56, that's going to be D. What can be inferred from lines 20 to 22? We can check the lines. Through education, D has the tools to make her family feel inferior. We see that condescension. We see that the family is feeling as if they're not really up to D's level. Alright, I can explain more in the comments if needs be, but I think these are straightforward, from here to the end. 57C, the dialogue in lines 33 to 40 serves to intensify the conflict and deepen the confrontation. I think that's the only possible answer that you could find. 58, D decides to change her given name and now call herself Wangero, chiefly because, and I think this one was a little bit tricky, she feels it is a slave name. No, it's not tricky. Feels it's a slave name and a reminder of domination and cruelty. Let's just quickly find that one. What happened to, so no mama, not D, this is my new name. What happened to D? I wanted to know. She's dead. So that identity, that old name is dead, Wangero said. So even the narration switches to the new name. I couldn't bear it any longer being named after people who oppressed me, right? So clearly This name reminded D or Wangiru of oppressors, of slavery, and she didn't want to keep that name because it would be, a connection to that past. Not really her past, but, the past of her people. All right, 59. Which statement best captures what is being said about the mother-daughter relationships? That would be A. It's complex but strong. It's a strong relationship, but there are many nuances. It's not very easy to decipher how they feel about each other. There are many layers to it, and that's the only answer that makes sense. As I said, hit me up in the comments if anything is unclear. I just need to get to the end. 60. D. Which of the following symbols in the extract represents family heritage and trauma? It would be the house. A and C are madness, and it's not so much the yard, but it's the house on the yard. All right, that's the end of it. Let me know in the comments if you need clarity on anything, especially in this last passage, because I really just blitzed through it. Anyway, good luck on your exams, guys. That's it from me.